In the ruthless shadows of Seoul's underworld, Kwon Tae-Sung rules with absolute control, a man feared by enemies and trusted by no one. To secure a fragile peace between rival syndicates, he agrees to an arranged marriage with the quiet and mysterious Oh Se-Rin, a woman he barely knows. But on the night meant to unite two empires, a hidden passport and a forged identity shattered everything he believed to be true. The woman beside him isn't his bride. She is an imposter, connected to the men who murdered his father. As police pressure tightens and rival gangs circle like predators sensing weakness, Tae-Sung faces an impossible choice: execute the woman who deceived him, or protect the stranger who has somehow become the only person he cannot bring himself to kill. In a world built on betrayal, power, and blood, trust may be the most dangerous gamble of all. The rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, sounding like 1,000 tiny fingers trying to break in. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Kwon Tae-Sung stood in the center of the room, his black wedding suit damp and heavy. He didn't look like a happy groom. He looked like a hunter who had just found a trap. In his hand, he held a small piece of plastic, the identity card. In the other, a silver lighter flickered, its orange flame dancing in its dark, watery eyes. "Who are you?" Tae-Sung asked. His voice was a low growl, cracking with a pain he couldn't hide. "I stood at the altar today. I promised to protect you. I gave you my name. But this card says my wife doesn't exist." Oh Se-Rin sat on the edge of the large bed, her white lace dress spilling around her like a broken cloud. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply watched the flame get closer to the ID card. Her long dark hair was wet from the balcony rain, and a single tear tracked through the makeup on her pale cheek. "Tae-Sung, please," she whispered. Her voice was steady, filled with a quiet sadness that hurt him more than a lie. "Don't use my name," he snapped, his hand trembling as he brought the flame closer to the corner of the card. "The woman I married was the daughter of a businessman. She was shy. She was innocent. But you? You have 3 different names in this bag. You have a phone that only calls ghosts." He stepped closer, pinning her with a look of pure betrayal. He wanted to be angry. He was the boss of the city's most dangerous men, after all. He was supposed to be heartless. But as he looked at her, his lips trembled. For the first time in his life, he had let someone in, and they had walked in with a knife behind their back. "Is any of it real?" he whispered, his eyes searching hers for a spark of the woman he thought he loved. "The way you looked at me when we danced? The way you held my hand at the ceremony? Was it all just a job?" Se-Rin looked up at him, her eyes filled with a terrifying honesty. "The marriage was a lie, Tae-Sung. But the way I feel when I'm with you, that was the only thing I couldn't fake." Tae-Sung clicked the lighter shut, plunging the room into shadows. He leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Then give me a reason not to call my men. Give me the truth, or this room becomes your grave." The silence in the penthouse was shattered by a sharp, metallic click from the hallway. Tae-Sung's eyes shifted instantly. The look of a heartbroken husband vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp gaze of a predator. He was no longer a man feeling betrayal, he was once again a boss. He reached into his waistband and pulled out a sleek, black handgun. "Stay down," he commanded in a harsh whisper. Before Se-Rin could move, the heavy oak doors burst open. 2 men in tactical gear, their faces hidden behind black masks, stormed into the room. They didn't shout commands. They raised guns equipped with silencers, ready to turn the bridal suite into a slaughterhouse. Tae-Sung fired twice. The cracks of his weapon echoed in the small space as he dove behind a heavy marble table, pulling Se-Rin down with him. "They're my men," Tae-Sung hoisted, his jaw tight with rage. "That's my inner circle's gear. This wasn't an accident. They knew the truth about you, and they're using it as an excuse to kill us. Both. Suddenly, Se-Rin moved in a way no shy bride ever could. She didn't cower or scream. She grabbed a heavy glass vase from the table and smashed it against the floor. As one of the gunmen rounded the corner, she didn't run away, she lunged forward. With a speed that made Tae-Sung's heart stop, she used a jagged piece of glass to disarm the attacker, kicking his weapon across the floor toward Tae-Sung. She moved with the grace of a professional, her white wedding dress tearing as she spun. In seconds, the first attacker was on the ground, and she was holding a second weapon, aiming it at the doorway with steady, expert hands. Tae-Sung stared at her, his mind racing. The sheltered daughter was gone. Standing before him was a weapon. You aren't just an imposter, Tae-Sung realized as the sound of more footsteps approached from the hallway. You're a soldier. Se-Rin didn't look back. Her eyes were fixed on the door, her finger resting on the trigger. I told you, Tae-Sung. I was sent to find the truth. But right now, the only truth that matters is that we have to get out of here alive. The hallway exploded with gunfire. The stranger he had married had just saved his life, but the betrayal felt deeper than ever. Now, he had to trust a killer to survive the night. The service elevator groaned as it dropped toward the garage. Inside the small, metal box, Tae-Sung and Se-Rin stood back to back. The smell of gunpowder from the room above still clung to their clothes. Tae-Sung kept his eyes on the floor numbers, his hand tight on his pistol. He didn't look at his bride, but he could feel her breathing, fast and shallow. When the door slid open, they ran for his armored SUV. Tae-Sung floored the gas, the tires screaming against the concrete as they burst out into the rain-slicked streets of Seoul. He drove like a possessed man, weaving through the neon-lit traffic until the penthouse was far behind them. Finally, he pulled into a dark alleyway under a bridge and killed the engine. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof. Talk, Tae-Sung said. His voice was cold, but his hands were shaking on the steering wheel. You just fought like a professional assassin. My own men tried to kill me because of you. Who are you really? Se-Rin reached up and pulled the damp, torn veil from her head. She let it fall to the floor like a piece of trash. In the dim light of the dashboard, her eyes didn't look like the eyes of a shy bride. They looked like the eyes of someone who had seen too much. My name is Min-hee, she whispered. The real Oh Se-Rin, the girl you were supposed to marry. She's safe, but she's hidden away. I took her place because I had to. Tae-Sung turned to her, his face twisted in confusion and anger. Why? Why risk your life to trick me? Because of the ghost contract, she said, her voice trembling for the first time. A rival clan. The Baekdu took my younger brother and my mother. They told me if I didn't marry you and plant a tracking device in your office, they would kill them. I'm not an assassin, Tae-Sung. I'm a sister who was given a choice between a lie and 2 funerals. She reached into a hidden pocket in her dress and pulled out a small, blinking black box. She held it out to him with a shaking hand. This is what they wanted. I was supposed to hide it under your desk tonight. But after I met you, after I saw that you weren't the monster they said you were, I couldn't do it. Tae-Sung looked at the tracker, then at the woman who had just saved him. She had lied to him. Yes. She had stood at the altar as a stranger. But she was trapped in a cage just like he was. They won't stop, Tae-Sung said, his voice softening. If you don't plant that, they'll come for your family. And they'll come for us. Min-hee looked at him, tears finally spilling over. I know. I've lost everything anyway. I just couldn't let them kill you, too. Tae-Sung reached out and took the tracker, crushing it in his palm. The lie was over, but the real war had just begun. The next morning, the sun rose over Seoul, but the light felt cold. Tae-Sung and Min-hee stood before the tall glass doors of the syndicate's headquarters. To the rest of the world, they were still. The powerful mafia boss and his lovely new bride. Tae-Sung reached out and took Min-hee's hand. Her skin was freezing, but she didn't pull away. "Remember," Tae-Sung whispered, leaning close as if he were sharing a sweet secret. "If we stop smiling for even a second, they will know. We have to be the happiest couple in the room." Min-hee squeezed her hand back, her face transforming into a mask of perfect, glowing joy. "I've been a stranger for weeks, Tae-Sung. I can do this for one more day." They walked into the boardroom where the senior members of the mafia were waiting. The air was thick with tension and the smell of expensive cigars. At the head of the table sat Choi, Tae-Sung's second in command. His eyes narrowed when he saw them enter. He looked disappointed, like a man who had expected to hear news of a funeral rather than a honeymoon. "Tae-Sung, we heard there was trouble at the penthouse last night," Choi said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "We were worried the new Mrs. Kwon had been frightened away." Tae-Sung laughed, a sound that was loud and hollow. He pulled Min-hee closer, resting his arm around her waist. "Frightened? My wife is braver than most of the men in this room. We dealt with those intruders together. Isn't that right, darling?" Min-hee smiled up at Tae-Sung, her eyes shining with a look that seemed so much like love it made Tae-Sung's heart ache. "It was quite a wedding gift," she joked lightly. "But as long as I am with my husband, I feel perfectly safe." The board members began to clap and cheer, fooled by the beautiful lie. But underneath the table, Min-hee's other hand was busy. She had hidden a tiny hacking device in her bridal purse. While she played the part of the doting wife, the device was silently vibrating, draining files from the syndicate's private network. Tae-Sung kept talking, making bold plans for the future of the family, but his eyes were constantly scanning the room. He watched the way Choi's hands shook as he lit a cigarette. He saw the way the guards at the door shifted their weight. Every laugh was a battle. Every touch was a tactic. They were dancing on a thin wire, pretending to be in love while they searched for the proof they needed to survive. As the meeting dragged on, Tae-Sung realized the most dangerous part of the lie: the more he pretended she was his wife, the more he wished it wasn't a lie at all. The meeting at headquarters had been a nightmare of fake smiles and hidden daggers. To escape the suffocating air, Tae-Sung led Min-hee up to the rooftop garden of the high-rise building. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple, and a cold, misty rain began to fall, soaking into Tae-Sung's expensive suit and sticking Min-hee's hair to her cheeks. Tae-Sung let go of her hand the moment the heavy metal door clicked shut behind them. The happy couple act was over. He turned to her, his face hard. "The files you downloaded would be worth it. Choi is getting suspicious. He looked at you like you wanted to peel away your skin and see who is hiding underneath." Min-hee didn't answer right away. She walked to the edge of the roof, looking out at the millions of lights in Seoul. The rain was coming down harder now, blurring the city into a sea of neon colors. When she finally turned back to him, she wasn't the confident soldier who had fought off assassins. Her shoulders were slumped, and her eyes were wide and glossy with tears. "I can't do this anymore, Tae-Sung," she whispered. Her voice was thin, breaking against the sound of the wind. Tae-Sung stepped closer, his anger fading into confusion. "What do you mean? We have the data. We're winning." "I'm not talking about the mission," she cried out, the tears finally spilling over and mixing with the rain on her face. "I was trained to be a stranger. I was trained to lie to men like you. But every time you look at me like you actually care, every time you protect me, it feels like a knife in my chest." Tae-Sung froze. He saw the rare vulnerability in her expression, the way her lips trembled and her hands clutched at the green silk of her dress. She wasn't just afraid of Choi or the syndicate. She was afraid of her own heart. I was supposed to hate you, she sobbed, stepping toward him until she was standing in the rain. Right in front of him. I told myself you were just a target. But I fell for you, Tae-Sung. I fell for the man who tries to be a monster but still has a soul. And now, the lie is the only thing I have left. Tae-Sung reached out, his hand shaking as he touched her wet cheek. He realized then that he wasn't just looking at an imposter or a partner. He was looking at the only person who truly knew him. In the middle of the storm, the boss of the mafia finally understood the truth. The love they had built on a lie had become the most real thing in his life. The morning after the rooftop storm, the air in the syndicate's private lounge felt like a trap, ready to snap shut. Tae-Sung sat at his large mahogany desk, trying to focus on paperwork, but his mind was on Min-hee. He could still feel the cold rain on his skin and the heat of her confession. The heavy double doors opened, and Choi walked in. He didn't wait for an invitation. He didn't even pretend to be respectful. Instead, he tossed a thick yellow envelope onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. You look tired, Tae-Sung, Choi said, his voice smooth and dangerous. He helped himself to a drink from the crystal decanter in the corner. Marriage is supposed to be a happy time, but you look like a man waiting for a ghost to haunt him. Tae-Sung didn't touch the envelope. I have a lot on my mind, Choi. Get to the point. Choi smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. The point is in that folder. You see, I've always been good at checking backgrounds. The woman living in your home, the one wearing your family diamonds. She isn't Oh Se-Rin. She's a ghost. A fake. A pretty little spy who probably has a knife hidden in her garter belt right now. Tae-Sung felt his heart hammer against his ribs, but he kept his face as still as stone. You're talking nonsense. You're the one who helped vet the family alliance. I lied, Choi shrugged, leaning over the desk until he was inches from Tae-Sung's face. I knew she was an imposter the moment she walked into the church. I let her stay because I wanted to see how long it would take for you to fall for her. And you did. You became soft. You chose a stranger over your own men. Tae-Sung gripped the arms of his chair. What do you want, Choi? I want the crown, Choi whispered. By noon today, you will sign a letter saying you are stepping down due to health reasons. You will hand over the keys to the accounts and the docs. If you don't, I'll hand that folder to the board. They don't like being lied to, Tae-Sung. They'll execute her in the street, and they'll kill you right next to her for being a fool. Tae-Sung looked at the envelope. Inside were photos of Min-hee at her father's grave and records of her real name. The beautiful lie was being torn apart. Choi wasn't just attacking his power, he was using the woman Tae-Sung loved as a weapon against him. You have 2 hours, Choi said, heading for the door. Make a choice. Your empire, or the life of a girl who was sent here to destroy you. Tae-Sung sat in the silence, the weight of the blackmail pressing down on him. He had spent his life building this throne, but as he looked at the folder, he realized a throne was just a lonely chair if he had to step over Min-hee's body to keep it. The grand hall was filled with the sound of clinking glasses and soft violin music, but for Tae-Sung, it felt like a funeral. He sat at the long dinner table, dressed in a sharp tuxedo that felt like a straitjacket. Next to him, Min-hee sat in her elegant gown, her face a mask of perfect calm. Across from them, Choi sat with a smug smile, waiting for Tae-Sung to sign the papers. That would give away his empire. A toast, Choi announced, standing up. To the happy couple, and to the new future of our family. The room went quiet. Tae-Sung felt the weight of the pistol tucked into his waistband. He looked at Min-hee. Under the table, she squeezed his hand. Her eyes were fixed on the exit, and she gave him a tiny nod. She had a plan, and it didn't involve surrendering. Suddenly, the lights flickered and died. The beautiful room was plunged into pitch black. Darkness. Shouts rang out as chairs scraped against the floor. Crash! The giant glass windows shattered as a hail of bullets tore through the room. Choi's men weren't waiting for the signature anymore, they were finishing the job. Tae-Sung dove across the table, tackling Min-hee to the floor just as a line of bullets shredded the velvet chair where she had been sitting. Go! Tae-Sung shouted over the noise of the gunfire. Get to the back exit. I'll hold them off. Min-hee scrambled up, grabbing a fallen guard's weapon. She had a clear path to the door. This was her luck. Her mission was to escape and clear her father's name. If she left now, she would be free. But as she reached the door, she looked back. Tae-Sung was pinned down behind a tipped marble table. 3 of Choi's hitmen were closing in on him, their guns aimed at his head. He was out of ammunition, clicking his empty pistol in a desperate attempt to defend himself. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers one last time. He wasn't asking for help, he was silently telling her to run. Min-hee stood at the doorway. Her heart hammered in her chest. The mission was her whole life, but Tae-Sung was her heart. She realized then that the wedding was never real, but the man bleeding on the floor was. With a scream of defiance, Min-hee turned back. She didn't run into the night. She ran into the gunfire. She dove over a sofa, firing with expert precision and taking down the 2 men closest to Tae-Sung. She slid across the floor, reaching his side and handing him her spare magazine. I thought you were leaving. Tae-Sung gasped, his face covered in dust and sweat. I'm a stranger, remember? Min-hee said, her eyes burning with a fierce light as she pulled the trigger again. And strangers don't always do what they're told. The paper bride was gone. In her place was a woman who had chosen love over a mission. Even if it meant they might die together in the dark. The smoke from the shootout still filled the air as Tae-Sung pulled Min-hee into the cold night. They were safe for a moment, but he knew the syndicate was like a wounded beast, it wouldn't stop until it saw blood. He looked at Min-hee, her white dress now stained with soot and red. And he knew there was only one way to truly save her. He had to make her disappear. They won't stop hunting the woman who betrayed the board, Tae-Sung said, his voice a low, urgent whisper as they reached the edge of a dark pier. The black water of the Han River slapped against the wood below. As long as Oh Se-Rin is alive, you are a target. And as long as you are with me, Choi will find you. Min-hee shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. I'm not leaving you, Tae-Sung. We fought together. We survived together. Tae-Sung took her face in his hands. He looked at her with a love that hurt to show. You aren't leaving me. You're becoming a ghost. I'm going to tell them that the stranger died tonight. I'm going to tell them I took care of the problem myself. Before she could argue, Tae-Sung pulled off the heavy diamond necklace she wore, the symbol of her lie as a mafia bride. He took a stray piece of her torn lace veil and caught it on a jagged piece of the pier's railing. Then, he fired 2 shots into the water and tossed her white bridal shoes into the dark waves. When my men arrive, they will see the signs of a struggle. They will see the evidence that I pushed you into the river to protect my pride, he explained. To the mafia, you will be a dead traitor. But to me, you will be Min-hee, and you will be free. A black car waited at the end of the pier, driven by the only guard Tae-Sung still trusted. He handed Min-hee a thick envelope filled with cash and a new passport, one that didn't belong to a spy or a socialite, Go to the safe house in the mountains, he commanded. Wait for me there. Once I finish cleaning the nest of vipers in the city, I'll come for you. We will start a life where nobody knows our names. Minhee's eyes filled with tears. She understood now. He was killing the bride to save the woman he loved. She leaned in and kissed him one last time, a kiss that tasted of salt and wood smoke. Don't make me wait too long, she whispered. She stepped into the car, and it sped away into the shadows just as the distant sirens of the syndicate began to wail. Tae-Sung stood alone on the pier, looking down at the empty water. He had just lost his wife, but for the first time, he felt he had finally found the truth. 6 months had passed since the night the world thought the bride of the Kwon syndicate had drowned in the cold river. In a quiet seaside village far from the neon lights and roaring traffic of Seoul, the air smelled of salt and wild grass instead of smoke and expensive perfume. Here, there were no bodyguards, no hidden cameras, and no blood-stained contracts. Tae-Sung walked up the narrow stone path toward a small wooden house overlooking the ocean. He was no longer wearing a tailored black suit or a heavy gold watch. He wore a simple linen shirt, and the hard, sharp lines of his face had softened in the sun. He looked like a man who had finally put down a heavy weight he had been carrying his whole life. He reached the porch and stopped. Minhee was standing there, watching the sunset. Her hair was shorter now, and she wore a simple yellow dress that fluttered in the breeze. She looked at peace. When she turned and saw him, a smile broke across her face, a real smile that reached her eyes, the kind she never had to fake. Is it done? She asked gently. Tae-Sung nodded. He had spent months carefully dismantling his empire, handing over evidence to the authorities who sent Choi and the rest of the traitors to prison for life. He had walked away from the money, the power, and the name that everyone feared. He had nothing left but the clothes on his back and the ring in his pocket. The Mafia Boss is dead, he said, taking her hands in his. And the girl who was sent to destroy him is gone too. There is no more Oh Se-Rin. There is no more Kwon Tae-Sung. Minhee leaned her forehead against his. For the first time, they weren't looking over their shoulders. They weren't checking for shadows or listening for the click of a gun. They were just two people standing on a porch, watching the sky turn pink and gold. Who are we now? She whispered. Tae-Sung pulled her close, breathing in the scent of the sea. We are whatever we want to be. We are strangers who put on a rainy night and decided to choose each other. No names, no titles. Just us. As the sun dipped below the water, they walked into the house together. They were leaving behind a world of lies for a life that was finally, beautifully real. The war was over, and the stranger he had married had become the only truth he ever needed.